Hello, folks. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today I got a Q&A interview with Grayson Stricker. I had the good fortune of meeting Grayson not too long ago, actually. When he was part of his bootcamp experience, we got to talk a little bit about what he was going through. And I recently actually had the chance to re-speak to him a little bit about his bootcamp experience and just everything they went through. And the one thing I was just super impressed with his background was just talking about what he actually did in the boot camp, how he actually used that knowledge to actually go get a job, and just really the raw mechanization behind of what he went through there. There was almost just a passionless execution. It was actually, I think, because of some of your background you had that you went through. So, Grayson, I just wanted to take some time and chat with you today. So, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Brian. Definitely happy to be here. I like the way you described it, though. What you described as the passionless mechanization.
Yeah, passionless execution. It's actually
Execution.
I mean, because everyone talks about passionful execution, but the one thing that I really notice, and especially in people who do things well, is just being able to take something off and put it into auto drive, right? To go through. And applying for jobs is definitely one of those things. But we'll get to that in a little bit. I actually want to talk a little bit about there. So currently, right now, you actually you graduated and you currently have a job at Sunbelt Rentals. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you went there. You've been doing that for 3 months. So how much time did you actually have between your boot camp and getting that job? Like, what was your time frame roughly?
Yeah, the time frame it's about 2.5 months or so
Now,
before getting it.
2.5 months. Now, how long roughly did you, like compared to your peers? Like, were you above average for your peers? Were you about the same? Did you take longer? How did you compare to people that graduated with you?
I think for at least my class of about 50 people, I was in I'd probably say the top 25% as far as earliest.
Mm-hmm.
And then past that, it kind of trickled off, and we didn't really hear back. But from the people I've kept up with, which is probably about 10 people, I'd say about half of us ended up with new jobs, and the other half used the skills of their current job or
Mm-hmm.
still kind of on the search ongoing as the last couple months.
Oh, interesting. Actually, you know what? I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but I really want to dive into that. So let's go back. So talk to me about your career before the boot camp and what really made you want to go into that direction. Like, what really drove you to, going to a boot camp?
Yeah, well, that was kind of a happy accident, honestly.
Okay.
I can thank COVID for that. That was
Ah.
really I had a lot of time in the house, and I had previously been in the sales industry, so I was working for a plastic distributor. So
Mm-hmm.
went from inside sales to outside sales, and during the outside sales phase, I was on the road 3 or 4 days a week, eating fast food a lot. Just wasn't very happy with that lifestyle. So wanted to change, and then I quit actually right before COVID. And during that time period, I was kind of doing some property management, a little bit of that work with that as an assistant property manager.
Mm-hmm.
And during COVID, I started a it's like a free online Python class because COVID was happening.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, so first the intro was Python, and I had tried programming back in high school actually with an AP programming class, but it just
Right.
didn't stick. And for whatever reason, the scripting and Python and saying, "Hey, I want to automate something," that just really kind of struck a nerve with me.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. That drove you to. So okay, so all right, interesting. So you were on the job, you weren't super happy with being on outside sales, and again, I get that. I was a former salesperson actually for my family's insurance business. You want to go through it, so you went through a free course online, which is actually the way I originally did it, and then I continued to do kind of self-taught there. So you went through the free Python course. What made you go and say, okay, I need to ramp this up, and a boot camp is the thing that is going to make me, that's going to take me to the next level.
Yeah, I think the main one with that is that I think the networking aspect is really good, and also working with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's me explaining to other people how things work or kind of working things out as a group, I really enjoyed the group aspect.
Interesting.
And I knew that that would kind of put me on a deadline as far as, hey, I have this amount of time, got to do it. I'm putting skin in the game.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, okay, so there's a bit of a okay. I get that with the skin of the game. I'm curious if somebody had challenged you to go and say you could only use online learning courses or basic like paid Udemy courses, things like that, to learn Python development and whatever resources you get for free. Do you think you would have been successful in the path? Do you think that would have you could have made the transition that way?
I think it's possible. For me, I think I could have done it. I think it probably would have taken longer.
Hmm.
And I don't know if the money I spent on the boot camp would have been worth an extra 6 months of searching. I don't know
Interesting.
if that trade-off is worth it.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking about it as a trade-off between the time it would have taken you to do it on your own versus actually getting into the boot camp and getting a head start. So do you almost see it like a do you almost view the money as like a time saver?
Oh, 100%.
Really? It's interesting. I've talked to lots of people coming out of boot camps, and I've always heard the structure argument for boot camps, but I've never heard the time saving. So right, because again, my journey was I started off basically teach. I basically decided I'm going to be a developer. God damn it, and I'm going to make the transition to do that. I picked up Zed Shaw's How to Learn Python the Hard Way, which really spoke to me. Like I've never read a course like that, and I did that. But then it took me, let's see, that was in the beginning of 2012. I wasn't really using Python on my job for another 2 to 3 years. And I wouldn't say I was fully invested into it with, maybe 5 years, right, to be able to do that. So it took me a while to go through this transition. You kind of saw this as, well, I could do something like that, or I could go through and do it. But you didn't see it as, well, if I take 3 years, you didn't think it would be impossible if I didn't go through the boot camp. You just saw it as accelerating you to whatever pace you were at, to get you.
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely say with the accelerating, I think that another big aspect of it is that you're in the boot camp,
Mhm.
you know what you're doing, you're on a direct path. Versus if you're learning in your free time, you're kind of alone in that kind of like I was just in my room just doing
Right.
Python, and it's COVID, so it's with all the other people that was such a big help.
Right.
And I think it also got over the imposter syndrome by being in the boot camp. I'm in something official. I'm doing this versus I'm on my free code camp. I'm on Udemy. I'm on whatever these options are. And they're great options.
Right.
And for some people, they can work. But I think for speed, ease of use, being on a track, networking, there's other benefits to being in the boot camp.
That's really interesting. I've never heard it described that way. Because yeah, that's one thing I've considered there, and honestly, for me, I think it might be the probably the number one reason why I haven't gone full entrepreneurial path in that direction. To go through is actually the isolation. To go through, and that's the thing. I don't like. I'm not really even sure how I made it into development. I think I had enough friends along the way, and I'm just so social. I just stumbled into groups there. But I think the isolation I know is something that's always bugged me on that side, and that part makes sense to me. But I've never heard the argument for for speed purposes. So that's actually quite interesting. So already, so you made the decision to go into the boot camp and you went through there. What was that experience like? Like first off, what was the boot camp that you went to?
Yeah. So the boot camp it was run through Trilogy. It was the UNC Chapel Hill boot camp,
Hmm.
and yeah, full stack coding boot camp.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you found the full stack boot camp, which is that a 24-week program?
Yeah, it was the 6 month one.
Okay, so it's a 24-week program, and yeah, I've always heard that. I've never gone through one of those programs myself, but I've always heard the pace is a lot to take in. I mean, did you find that to be true?
I found that to be true for the last third. I did a decent amount of prep work beforehand,
Okay.
both with Python, and then once I said, "Hey, I'm doing the boot camp," I had about a month of time, and I went through my free code camp and uh, did my best to study as much as possible ahead of time. So when it came to the actual coding aspect of it, I kind of had a leg up on other people.
Interesting. So what compelled you to study to that level to go through? Because my assumption would be if somebody were going through a program, be like, well, okay, I just dropped a ton of money on this program. It's your guy's problem now. What compelled you to want to study beforehand?
The honest truth on that is that I watched a lot of YouTube videos.
Hmm.
I compared pretty much all of the top rated boot camps,
Hmm.
and I did not choose any of them because they were about 3 times more expensive than the UNC one.
Oh, okay.
So cost was a big factor in that.
Hmm.
And with looking at the boot camp, you're going to learn the same thing at any of the boot camps. I think some are probably a little more structured,
Hmm.
and I think they have a higher likelihood of landing you a job. However, if you take any boot camp seriously and you spend a lot of time, you do prep work, you go outside of your way to learn more, I think you can be successful. And that's the decision I made, and it happened to work out that way, which I'm
Okay,
glad.
that's good. So it was a slightly cheaper program. It has a hell of a title on it, by the way. You know, it's being able to say you came out of the UNC Bootcamp, which, by the way, I'm a UNC graduate, so
Hey,
I do
I am as well.
that. Yeah, right. So you go through the boot camp. You have a pedigree behind you to go through that. I tend to agree, but I'm getting a sense though that you have a very high locus of control when it comes to these sorts of things. That you felt it seems like you do, because again, I would have assumed that okay, you're going to teach me programming. I'm just going to kind of go through, but you almost prepared for the program. Like you didn't consider the fact that you paid for it, that it's your job. You still kept that. Is that sense true? What I'm feeling?
Oh, 100%. I really think that for the boot camp, I wanted to go into the boot camp and excel.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be in the top 5% the entire boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
and then network with the top 5% was my goal initially going into it. So I'd already
Right.
kind of set that goal originally.
Right. So I actually heard that, and I even use that analogy too when talking about boot camps, where it's like the top 25%, mid 25, bottom 50 to be able to go through. But is there like how do you judge percentiles in boot camps? Like there aren't actual grades, right, for these boot camps, right? You know, do they have anything like that?
There are grades, but they don't really matter.
Right.
It's kind of a pass fail at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think for that, I can only speak from my own experience, which
Mm-hmm.
was there are people in class who talk a lot, who ask a lot of questions. Um, and some people are asking more intelligent questions that are more when people are asking about things that aren't in the boot camp
Mm-hmm.
because they have curiosity and they're exploring new things. Those are the people I want to be around. The people that when they get out of class, they're tinkering.
Interesting. Let me make sure I understand. Are you saying that you want to be one of those people, or are you saying you want to be around those sorts of people?
I would say that I am one of those people and I
Okay.
wanted to be around those people.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
so kind of like birds of a feather where it's we each come into it with our own knowledge base and we expand upon it with the boot camp in one common direction. And then once you find the people that are going above and beyond the boot camp, then you can kind of trade knowledge. So I
Right.
had a friend from the boot camp who now works for Amazon, and he spent a lot of time doing AWS. I joined an AWS study group with him, and I learned a lot of stuff that helped me get my current position. Not part of the boot camp.
Right.
I have
Right. Yeah.
another friend that um, he currently works for IBM, and he got really into Kubernetes and um, doing other DevOps and just doing everything. And so I learned a lot from him. So I
Just
had this network.
Yeah, just amazing. He was so lucky to get that job. I hear his boss is just an absolutely amazing guy.
Great guy, great guy.
Yeah, great guy. He was just amazing. I hear he's very handsome and sexy. It's me. I hired his friend to go through. For anyone confused about that last segment, yeah, no, but it's actually I kind of put you guys there go through because that's the thing. One of the things I want to get into with what I'm doing on my side is to help people that are kind of at the bottom end who really struggle with these programs. Like I really want to find somebody in that group where it's like, let me help you get through that. And I want to make that, you know, I'm not sure if it's a personal project or interesting content here, but I find that people like you go through the program and like, I'm not worried about you, right? You know, and that's the even for like somebody like Michael when I met him, I wasn't worried about him. I like the idea of him working for our company, but if he didn't come to IBM, like he lands somewhere. But I guess for your opinion on people who you didn't necessarily get that sense from, where they didn't have as much of a high locus of control, did you get a sense that those folks were going to be all right as well, or there was a change? Like, would there be like some targeted advice you had for that group to try to turn the engine on them, if you will?
Yes, I think for that, and I not even just for them, but I think anyone learning coding, a very common trap people fall into is that they don't think they know enough to do something,
Mm-hmm.
make something. So they want to keep saying, I need to learn more. Someone needs to teach me and show me how to do this. I think that the advice I would give is say, hey, go out and as quickly as possible, brute force memorize whatever you do in your language. So
Hmm.
learn your for loop, your ifs, your whiles, learn all those, make some flashcards on them, do whatever you can to just brute force memorize. And now that you have the tools, you have the Legos in front of you,
Right.
build a car, even if it's terrible. And if you get stuck somewhere, bang your head against the keyboard for 20 minutes and then phone a friend.
Yeah, that's actually really good advice. I like that systematic thinking. We'll get to that in a second to go through there. I had very similar advice for I guess my team when we were moving into a new role where there were people we get tickets in our our queue that we were more difficult, right? And they weren't necessarily technically difficult, more that you didn't necessarily know where you had to go to figure it out. It wasn't like going through and looking up a language, but it was still challenging. Um, and yeah, that was the advice I gave where it's like spend 10, 15 minutes just focusing on the problem. If you reach a point where you can't do it, just go churn, don't talk to anyone, go through and then go through and make that happen. But that advice I've used that, and that's very effective. I'm wondering I'm now trying to think through how can I how can I get that advice out to more people. But the previous thing you mentioned to go through, which was oh man, remind me, what were you just talking about? I just got lost in my thoughts.
Oh, kind of answering the question as far as what advice for people in like the bottom 50% or going to the boot camp.
Right. Oh, right. It was with the education or saying they need more education. And that's the thing. Like, it's been so long since I've been in that place for that, or at least I know my own loop to get out of it. So if I fall into it, I kind of go through that. But have you seen anyone successfully navigate that? Not even necessarily at the boot camp, but just I'm worried, I'm fearful to being someone who uses that excuse for lack of a better term and then transition into somebody who just didn't use that anymore that they've gone through. Have you ever seen anyone navigate that?
Can you ask one more time? I'm trying to make sure I'm
Yeah,
getting
yeah,
it
no
correct.
worries. So let's take somebody in front of us who's this person that you say, like, they're scared, they're worried about this, the situation, and they're saying, I'm just, I just need a little bit more education. I'm just a little bit more uncertain. Have you ever met anyone that successfully transitioned from being that sort of person and being that state into a person who didn't use that answer or whatever, or found a way beyond that? Have you seen that before? Have you seen that happen?
Um, the first one comes to mind is me, and I have that problem even now with some things.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely in the boot camp at first, I think I was like that. Not
Mm-hmm.
as much as some people, but as far as people that are really like that, not really. It's usually they they kind of stick with it.
Yeah.
That I've seen. Unfortunately, I've kind of offered the challenge to people in my personal life that are say, "Hey, you learned coding. I want to learn coding," and I kind of offer them the challenge of, "Hey, if you want to do it, don't run in 20 directions. Run a direction and kind of give them advice as far as what I would do if I wasn't going to do a boot camp, what I would learn." I've made a study guide, and it doesn't usually work out that way.
Yeah, I guess I've seen that too because I've noticed folks going through that, and that's the thing. I can't, because that's the thing. We're humans are very capable of seeing short-term changes, right, or whatever. And 6 months for some people are short-term, right? I'm wondering if that characteristic, like, because I believe humans can change pretty much anything. I'm very open to that belief to say that, but I've also noticed that people who use that excuse, at least in a short term, it doesn't break easily. I haven't seen somebody transition in a short period, other than like an intro. You're really at an early stage. Like that's the thing. Anyone within the first month of a job or something scary, like they go haywire, right? But then they reach a steady state. People who act like that in the first month and then fix are like that. I've seen that happen. But people who get to a steady state and use that, that seems to me much more challenging. I haven't seen people easily navigate that. Not that they haven't resolved it, only that in the short term period that I'm aware of them or talking with them, I haven't seen that transition that. Yeah, I was curious about that. But okay, actually, I did want to ask you about that. You said there was one tip you used that really helped you during the boot camp. What was it? The Anki cards? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, Anki cards, Anki,
Okay.
but I'm pretty sure it's like Japanese for rote memorization,
Okay.
something like that. But essentially, it's a smart flashcard system that reminds you to review the card as soon as you're about to forget it. And
I,
it goes off of like a forgetting curve, and it works really well.
so what are the things you used it for? Like what were the subject matters on these cards?
So it's kind of like I mentioned earlier, as far as my prep for the boot camp. I
Mm-hmm.
said, hey, I'm going to make 200 flashcards before the boot camp. So I went over to W3 schools. I found their exercises that said, kind of fill in the blank to show a loop when X is greater than 9, or just something, whatever it is, to loop through a certain amount of repetitions. And it'll have blank spaces, and I'd look at it and I'd say, oh, it needs to be a greater than sign here, or whatever it is. And click the card, and it'll show it was a greater than sign. Yes, show me this card in 2 weeks.
Interesting. So there were like short coding based programs that you, or a short coding based problems you found on W3 School.
So that's kind of where I started with it. And then it was, if there was a new technology in class, if there was the benefits of a certain, like for instance, something like React. What is the benefit of React? What are the downsides? And I'd list them, and I'd say, what are the 3 benefits? What are the downsides? And kind of like, what is big O notation? And a lot of these programming, computer science concepts that everyone says you should know this, and people go and they'll look it up and they'll know it that day. But I don't want to know it that day. I want to know it in 3 years from now, and I don't want to put any more effort into it, or minimum effort, I should say.
Excuse me. Oh, that's interesting, because my initial thought there was thinking through like, how do you practice like programming underneath that concept? And again, there's something about the experiential knowledge that you wouldn't be able to get from that technique. But for like things like Kubernetes, for example, where you just have this giant cluster which has tons and tons and tons of different elements that all have specialized names that you never really deal with, but you're going to be told about, something like that could actually be quite useful. But it's funny, it's that most of my peers wouldn't consider their job like, memorization, for lack of a better term, even though, especially on interviews, that's what you're judged on. It's like when you do a job, you're never judged on your ability to just remember what a particular element in Kubernetes is, but on like an interview, you absolutely will be judged on that.
Oh, 100%. And I think one of the biggest ROIs I got from using the flashcards, and kind of, if I had to say the first moment that I actually felt like a programmer or someone in technology, I was probably a couple months into boot camp, but I'd been learning React, and I was hanging out with some friends, and a friend of a friend was a full-time React developer, had been one for 5 years. And I started talking to him about React, and I was verbatim saying, like, textbook, what is React? What are the benefits? And I was asking intelligent questions based off of that. And he's like, wow, he's like, most people in the boot camp, they don't usually know things. Like, you seem like you know more than most of our junior developers. And I was still in the boot camp. So that experience really.
Now, did other people out of that boot camp do the same thing as you, or was this something you brought yourself?
I recommended it to people, but it takes work. Like it just does. And
yeah,
people don't get as excited about it. It's a long-term strategy, not a short-term one.
Yeah, because like there's a lot of things, and like I know one of the smartest computer scientist I ever met, who was basically, his dream job was working on like Linux kernels. He was at that level, would do something similar where he would literally have a different file pulled up from the Linux man pages, basically, on just random different things to go through there. And yeah, now that I'm starting to think about it, we don't really think of manual memorization as a big part of a software development job. But I mean, the more I'm talking to you, the more I'm realizing, that's actually a really easy way to do it. Because the thing too is that even though it takes work, it's also very consistent, and it's practicing something that is important to you, like that's the thing. Your ability to be able to practice a particular Kubernetes experience, like onboarding a new project or moving, getting onto monitoring, is very difficult. But your ability to open up a flashcard for 5 minutes and study 10 concepts that you haven't looked at in a while to go through, it's really easy. Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I'll have to remember that one, because I think there's something quite valuable there. But actually, I want to get to the reason why I asked you to come onto this interview to go through, which is actually your post-bootcamp experience, and kind of go through there. So take me through when you first graduated and you're like, okay, I need to get a job. What was your mentality? What were you thinking? And what was your strategy at that point to try to get a job?
So, and this is where the hindsight comes in, which is, if I took a kind of a third person perspective, looking at it, I would say I was just pedal to the metal.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of the boot camp, when you're first on HTML, it's kind of slow. And I was like, I did stuff beforehand. It's fine. It kept ramping up, ramping. And by the end of it, I am just pedal to the metal, learning all the time. So I got all the boot camp. And even before the boot camp was over, I was like, okay, I want to get this AWS certification. And then I want to keep learning this. And I'm going to make another 300 flashcards. I'm going to apply to 300 jobs. And I just said, I kind of broke it down in different segments as far as what is my recipe to get a job,
Mm-hmm.
and into the different skill sets and certifications. And I just kept iterating and made sure I touched as much as I could every day in each category. And
So,
I kept a spreadsheet the whole thing.
so you had a very deliberate education approach in the way that you operated to do that. How did you come up with that list? Like, what was it what drew you to that list? Okay, let me ask this. What didn't make the list that you really wanted to?
That's actually that's actually a good one.
Mm-hmm.
What didn't make the list is, and this is kind of going to something else, but during the boot camp, I also, this is how 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 crazy I am. I decided that I wasn't going to use YouTube or consume any media that wasn't related to technology.
Oh.
So I would go on YouTube, and for fun, I would watch, they call it the Unix archives. So I was watching like the creation of Unix and watching the history and listening to Linus Torvalds lectures, and just got into Richard Stallman for a while, just learning a bunch of stuff. And
Okay.
some that didn't come in were the fun things I want to do, like Vim. I wanted to learn. I was like, you know what, man, I really want to get into doing like some C or C++, just for fun, because I was like, this stuff's cool. I want to get away from GUIs. I want to be all on the command line all day. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was kind of the things that were exciting. I had to say, hey, no, I'm on a path. I'm on a path. Go forward. Don't run in every direction.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so actually that is really interesting that you were going through like Linux archives and things like that for your entertainment. Though I get that kind of gets you immersed into it. So okay, so you went out, you had your education to be able to go through. What else did you do as your part of your strategy? You're saying you needed to get a job. So how did you think about applying to jobs, networking, that side of it? What were you thinking on that side?
So on that side of it, well, for networking, I was really lucky in that I already had 4 or 5 friends that were working full time in technology.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I had a question on something, or even when I called for a chat during the day, I'd just talk about what I was working on. They'd tell me, hey, check out this new technology. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then whenever I went out on the weekends, I was like, hey, I need to get a job. I can't do anything else. And the way I would kind of get bribed into going out was saying, hey, we're going to the bar this weekend. So and so is a tech consultant, and you'd really like him. You should come out. And so I do a lot of networking, like at the bars.
Right.
So it worked out. But even while tipping a few, I'd be talking about technology. So it was really just full immersion.
Right. And so, okay, interesting. How did you find the networking like that? Like, did you do any, I'll call it deliberate networking, like networking events or networking on LinkedIn versus like, did you do any of that? Let me just start there.
So the ones, the LinkedIn networking things that I'm most proud of, I don't know if it's deliberate. I considered it playing a reverse Uno card,
Okay.
which is people would direct message me on LinkedIn saying, hey, have I got a sales job for you? And I would say, hey, I'm looking for a software engineering role, and it looks like you have a position open. Can we talk about it?
Oh, that's great. How often did that happen?
um, how often did I attempt it? A lot. How often did they have a role open that I wanted?
Less frequently.
Less frequently, but I'd say, I don't know, maybe 15% of the time. But it was almost, it made it fun for me,
Right.
because I would take a screenshot to my friends and be like, hey, do you think this will work? And I kept trying to make it fun
Oh,
as I went along.
that's interesting. Oh yeah, you should post those on LinkedIn now and just show how you're trying to get a job.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's interesting. So okay, so you had delivered network. Well, the question I wanted to ask is like how useful was that? Just bar time, fun networking versus like actual deliberate. Oh, I'm going out and meeting people. Like, how did you compare the two experiences?
That's tough to quantify.
Mm-hmm.
I think that communicating about technology with people and talking about it was basically my interview practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I would talk about technology, I'd ask questions, they'd go back and forth with me. So I think that was valuable as far as getting a job from it and interviews and things. There was talk. A lot of people are. There was a lot of talk as far as, oh yeah, no, come on, send a resume and everything, and it could be crickets sometimes.
Yeah.
But I really tried not to even think about that as it happened. It
Right.
was really just go forward. I have goals. This was a on the side. This was just an extra. This was for fun. This wasn't part of the actual plan.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, interesting. Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit because I find that part of what you've done useful, or at least useful to people. So, when you first started off, let's talk about quality versus quantity. My understanding is that when you first started off and you were applying to jobs, you were really in the call it the quality camp, which is you were trying to look for the best positions to apply to. Is that correct?
Somewhat, I think it was more of it was almost like imposter syndrome where it's if I do this, I need to make sure that everything's perfect. I need to have a perfect resume. I need to have a
Perfectionism.
perfect, yeah, perfectionism 100%. And that kind of had me frozen.
Mm-hmm.
The part I was like, no, I just need to send something. Send something terrible. Don't worry about it. Send it and you can fix it on the next go around.
Okay, okay, interesting. So, okay, so there was a perfectionism that kind of locked you in there, but did you say if did I hear that correctly that you very quickly moved over to the next phase of no, we're going to move into quantity.
I wouldn't say quickly. It was really a gradual increase. So the goal for a 3 month time period was 300 applications.
Oh, okay.
And and at first it was very. I think the first week I maybe had it was definitely sub 10. It was probably sub 5 as far as applications sent out. It might have been one. Let's say it's one for the sake of conversation. As far as just it was I was like, oh, should I do this? How do I do this? Is it good enough? I know I'm just gonna get rejected. What's the point? And
Okay.
then as time went on, it was like, okay, that doubled. Then it kept going, kept going, kept going to the point where it's like, oh no, I'm gonna clear 300 ahead of schedule. I'm gonna go for more. And I would just be like, oh, I another rejection letter, a wave of rejection letters in my email.
Yeah, okay. This is the part that I think really and it kind of showcases why diverse talent is interesting because how this experience really influenced you. Because what you just said there, oh, it's sub 5, sub 10. Let me tell you, a traditional software developer would never have used that language to describe it. They would just say, oh, I sent out 5 or 10 or whatever. But that sub 5, sub 10 sounds like sales to me. It sounds like a sales pitch. And again, I mean, I have family who's been doing sales and the direction you go through, and it's a very metrics driven. So let me ask, let me ask this: when did you start the spreadsheet?
The spreadsheet was started as soon as I got out of the boot camp.
Okay.
I planned at the end of the boot camp. Uh, the boot camp's coming to an end. I am getting a job. How am I going to do this? And I wrote down a list of goals, and then I had a just a set up spreadsheet as far as the company. Did I have a contact there? Any notes? And just took my notes on it. But I had it all set up before the boot camp ended.
Okay, so it was your plan. So you had the spreadsheet set up, but when you really thought about it, you really relied on your sales experience to really help guide. This is the way I should approach this. I mean, did that come naturally to you, or did someone coach you into that decision?
Well, and at the company I did sales for, we didn't have an official. We weren't using Salesforce or anything. I had
Mm-hmm.
a Excel spreadsheet CRM that I made for myself, and that at
Funny,
one
so do all the best salespeople I know.
hundred
they
percent,
seem
hundred
to
percent.
they seem to have an aversion to Salesforce, man. I don't know what it is, but they all have spreadsheets and they're all damn good at their jobs.
Yeah, I still like them. I keep spreadsheets for different things. But yeah, because even when I wasn't required to have one when I transitioned to outside sales, because inside I was kind of required to keep track of things. Outside it's a little more free for all, but I still kept it because I found it helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was a motivator in that it's almost like the little kid fundraisers when you have the thermometer on the wall and it goes through the top, and then you have a pizza party or whatever when you're raising money. It was kind
Right.
of like that in my head.
Right, but that's the thing. It wasn't the for you though, what you tracked was quite novel because most people would track successful interviews or whatever. You were just tracking applications sent. You were tracking the inflow, correct?
Oh, 100%.
So, okay, so that's what I think is quite interesting because here's what I see from a lot of people coming out of boot camps, which is that they take that rejection so personally. And there's some things about the industry that I can see why they feel that way. But to them, it's just that every time they get a rejection, it hurts. And not like a rejection from an interview. Like, that's the thing. Like, my worst interview I ever had was I went through a technical interview, talks with people, and they thought, we're not sure if you're a fit for the role, but we're going to keep pushing you up. I ended up talking to the VP of this shitty little consulting firm, basically, and he just railed on me the whole time. let me put it that way. That's going to sting for a little bit, to go through there. But I know people who sting because they get the automated rejection letter from IBM that would, to go through, that stings them or whatever. To them, that hurts. To you, you were celebrating it or you were laughing about it. Like,
yeah, there was definitely a lot of laughing. So as far as the actual goal, the goal for that 3-month time period was not to get a job. The goal was to get 300 rejections.
The goal was to get 300 rejections. Oh my.
Because that goal, I couldn't fail it. You can fail getting a job. You can fail getting an interview. Those are external. You can send out 300 poorly written resumes with a bad portfolio, with a LinkedIn that's not tweaked to perfection. You can do that. But as months go on and you're consistent with it, you can iterate a little bit. You can make it a little better. You can polish it up, polish it, get a little better, gain a little more skills, gain more confidence.
Wow, that is a really nice mentality. That's really awesome. Because to me, if I would have, I mean, when I did go through this process, I had a spreadsheet too, but my goal was to get the job. That was the goal. But I mean, that mindset difference there, because I mean, the way you described it, I really think passionless execution, which is just today I'm going to get up, I'm going to apply to 5 jobs. That is my goal to be able to go through that, is very rare, but it's also very, very useful. Okay, so let's talk about this. So you said you're looking to get 300 rejection letters and then you're going to continue. How many applications did you actually apply to before? Let's do this. How many applications did you apply to before you started getting like interviews consistently? Like, what number do you think you were at roughly?
I think it was probably about 75.
Okay.
And then I started getting a lot to the point where I was like, there's a lot going on. And once I had several interviews per week piling up, it was like, hey, I don't care about any of these.
Several interviews per week.
Yeah. And I just stopped caring completely.
Wow. Okay. So,
because I was like, hey, this one doesn't matter. There's something coming after.
Wow. Okay. So when you say you didn't care, you did take the interviews. You were just very, again, passionless execution about it. Just
once again, and I probably need to word that correctly.
Sure.
Not that I didn't care and I didn't value the opportunity, wasn't grateful or anything like that. As far as, hey, I'm going into this, I'm already rejected. I'm having a casual conversation, and I might learn something. I can ask them questions. One of my favorite interviews I had was. It was for a QA role,
mm-hmm.
and I personally did not want to go into QA. It just wasn't what I wanted.
Sure.
So I took the interview for the practice, and when I was talking with them, not to bring up reverse Uno card again, but I basically was like, I asked so many questions about transitioning into development role and kind of what I wanted to do that he was like, look, it has been great talking with you, and we have a dev team. He's like, I just don't think this is the role for you. He's like, I'm going to pass you along to the development team. I really think that for what you want, that would be a better fit for you.
That was great. That was nice of him.
But it was a great conversation. He was laughing. I was cracking up, and I was making jokes with him because once again, I knew the goal I wanted, and this with the questions I asked him, they weren't the answers I wanted.
Right.
So I was okay with it. But it was a good experience, and he passed me along.
Okay,
which is nice.
Oh wow. Okay, excellent. So, Alrighty then. So you had this interview, you started taking them, and it was just you said yes to get the practice to go through. Okay. So how many applications ultimately did it take you to before you got a job offer you wanted to accept?
Yeah, it was like 164, something like that.
164. Okay, so you still haven't actually gotten to your 300 rejections.
No, no, and that was kind of almost painful at the end, is that I had these goals of I want like 700 Anki cards by the end of the 3 months, and then I want 300 rejections and all these things. And at the end of it, I just crossed them all out, and I was like met the actual goal of the
Right,
umbrella,
the
which
big
wasn't
one.
actually listed. It wasn't even listed. Um,
Right. And you did that there, to go through. So the goal was to get 300 rejections. You can fail getting a job, but you can't fail getting the rejections. That's such a interesting process to go through there. So, alrighty. So, I mean, that's a very interesting process. Do you have like a template you use for your spreadsheet or anything? Is there anything that like you would recommend for people if they wanted to use your process?
I think that a lot of this is just personal, and
Right.
not just personal, or it's personal, but it's also impersonal. I think that if the minimum you can do is what you should do. If the first place you apply to, all you put is the name of the company and the date, and that's all you have the mental energy to do because it's tough and you're a perfectionist, that is perfect. You
Mm-hmm.
don't need the stats, you don't need the pie chart showing how many rejections and all the numbers. You just need to get moving. You need to stop thinking about it and just execute.
Yeah, I can attest to that because while my spreadsheet for applying to jobs was less robust, I guess I should say. I know my personal CRM I used has only like I started using it. It's now very consistent, for me to do that. And now as time goes on, like the thing that's driving me to expand it is not this feeling of obligation, but just stuff I want to see. Like I went through and updated and it says, "Hey, I now know I'm meeting people, but like I want to see how often I'm meeting people and how often I'm making connections, right? Like these two people know each other because of me. I want to record that. I want to know that I made that connection, to go through to make that happen. So I think that process makes a lot of sense. I think I can't remember which book I was reading saying that the goal is not to finish. The goal is just to start. The starting is the process, not the end, and it's just, to go through. And they went through tons of great examples of, people who did that. I think they talked to one lady who was a star ballerina, basically, where she was at the top of her field, and her routine in the morning, where again, she had these, of course, insane routine, but for her mentally, the routine was getting up, getting to the cab, and sitting down. That was the routine. Everything else afterwards pretty much happened automatically. It was just starting, to go through. And again, that your story really resonated with me. So, okay, so that's how a salesperson applies to jobs. I mean, what's amazing is just because, just hearing about your background, you had the technical chops, certainly. I mean, like you had that, but you didn't have the experience necessarily. You were going through just as good of experience, as anyone else out of your boot camp, and yet, I mean, you were getting multiple interviews a week. I talk to people who go years without interviews, after the boot camp experience, but it just seems like just this passionless execution is a great methodology for people going through that. So thank you very much for spending some time sharing that with me today.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
No, of course. So before we end this, do you have any last words or anything you want to pitch?
Yeah, I think for last words, I think that think less about it. Don't be attached to anything, and try to make jokes, even if they're only funny to yourself, about the process. If it was just a terrible rejection letter, print it off, have it on your desk, and laugh at it every day. If that's what it takes, go ahead.
Yeah, I get that. Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much. Well, Grayson, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian.